what we did at UBQ is, you know what? Let's go for that black bag, the stuff that no one wants to touch. And that's what we actually start with at UBQ. We take everything that you throw away in that black bag. I just mentioned the vegetables, the chicken bones, but we also take all those 17-layer films that no one wants to recycle.
Welcome to Leaders on a Mission. I'm your host, Simon Leach. Now, what if we could transform waste into valuable resources? Today, we meet Albert Douer, co-CEO of UBQ Materials, who's really making this vision a reality. So during this conversation, we're going to really dive in and discover how UBQ is changing the game in waste management and sustainability. Albert, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Simon.
Let's maybe take it back a little bit before the UBQ experience. Maybe talk through a couple of kind of maybe impactful moments of your career that really led to you kind of being involved with this company.
So it's actually an interesting way that I ended up at UBQ because I actually come from the plastics and chemical world, okay? Which sounds a little bit funny because sometimes I like to tell people, you know, they've always looked on us a little bit as the devil, you know, we're the ones that caused the problem. And the interesting thing is that I believe that much of the knowledge and the experience that I gained in that field is actually what has allowed me and my team to be able to do what we do in UBQ. Like I said, originally I started out in a small family business where we made plastic packaging and we made construction materials. And that was the beginning of a very long learning experience. I like to describe it that way. You know, plastics brought a lot of good to the world. I come from a poor country. I'm originally from Colombia. And I've seen the benefits of plastics, you know, in making food cheaper and making it transportable, in allowing, you know, the common man to have things that before were preserved, you know, for royalty. For example, you're from the UK, so you guys had royalty. We never had that in Colombia. But in any case, it brought a lot of good things. But you can't hide the fact that we also created a really big problem, okay? And I think that we were among the people that realized that the problem was real earliest, okay? Different from many of my colleagues in the plastics world. You know, I didn't believe that the way to solve the problem was through the courts, for example, trying to fight bans or trying to do things like that. I always thought that sooner or later we would have to find a solution to the problem. And the solution would have to be, how do we dispose of the plastic, okay? It has a really good use. That use is very functional, but then when you throw it out, as you know, we've created a really big problem. So over 20 years ago, we were among the first people in the Americas that started taking PET bottles and turning them back into food packaging, okay? It was something that very few people were doing. In fact, in those days, people you know, thought it was very strange that you could actually take something that had been in the garbage bin and turn it back into a food package. It didn't sound reasonable. But we had all the technology, FDA approvals, all the things that you needed to do in order to do that. And the interesting thing about that process was that I learned how difficult recycling is. Okay? Recycling is a great thing. If you can take a material, reuse it again into the same type of functionality that it originally had, I think there's a great benefit to humanity there. I firmly believe in recycling. On the other hand, we have to understand that there comes a point where recycling becomes very, very difficult. Okay, it's a marginal. You end up having lesser and lesser returns as you go. So there's a certain amount that you can collect easily. You can do it economically. It's probably a little bit cleaner and you can recycle it without any problem. But as things get more mixed in with more waste or with other things, it becomes much more difficult. If you happen to live, for example, you're a farmer, you live on a farm in an agricultural place, maybe having to take that PET bottle into the city is not such a comfortable thing, or there's a cost to it, or the municipality has to collect it all over the place. So as you know, recycling has its limits. The other problem with recycling is obviously all the sorting And mostly, one of the things that people always forget is that it's usually contaminated. The plastic gets contaminated, and what is that contamination? It's the organic material. So I learned very quickly all these issues with recycling, and that's why I ended up in UBQ, where we found the solution to some of those issues.
Fantastic. Tell me, how many years were you in the family kind of chemicals business then before?
Almost 40 years. Almost 40
Incredible.
years. I mean, for those of you that are not watching the video, I have really white hair.
Unbelievable. And you said you were looking back to solutions. Yeah, at what point were you really, if you think about that 40-year journey, when were you really starting to focus on possible kind of solutions for this?
Like I say, at least 20 years ago, one of the things, you'll find this a little bit funny in a way, but one of the things that got me really mad was we made foam packaging. People love to hate foam packaging. But the interesting thing is that my daughters were being taught in school that it was not recyclable. Okay? And I knew it was recyclable. A different story is we weren't recycling it, or people were not recycling it. But that doesn't mean it wasn't recyclable. So back then, I came up with an idea, which was, you know what? Let's start recycling the polystyrene foam. But I did something very interesting, which was I turned it into school utensils. Okay? And the school utensil would say, the ruler would say, this is made from recycled polystyrene foam. And originally what I did was I started giving it away at schools, particularly, obviously I started in my kids' school. I wanted the teachers to see it was recyclable. And today we've turned it into something much nicer, because what we do is that all of those school utensils, we actually donate them to schools in neighborhoods, where people don't. Again, I come from Colombia, where people don't necessarily have the means to buy them. So, what we have done is take something that people said was unrecyclable. We proved out the technology that it was recyclable, turned it into useful things. And then in this particular case, we also turned it into a social solution as well. And that's the kind of thing that I like to work on. I come from an industrial family, and that means that we're into solving problems. We're not into complaining about the problems. That's sort of the way that I like to think of myself, and I'd like to think of the people who work with me. We solve problems instead of just complaining about them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So tell us about UBQ Materials then, the problems you solve, and how it all works.
Yes. So UBQ really went to the core of what we need to do in the world. Okay. There is something that people don't, sometimes they understand it, but they don't visualize it. When we want to consume something, when we want to consume, we want a table for our house, we want a sofa, we want a car. For every kilo of what we consume, the number that is thrown out there a lot is that you need to extract about 70 kilos from the planet. So can you imagine that? In other words, we want one little piece of something and we have to extract 70 times the weight of that thing that we need. Okay? So what has been the system that we use in the world today? We think about it, we dig a hole, 70 kilos, right? Then we make something 1 kilo. Then we throw it away. Then we dig another hole. The next hole is 70 tons because we need even more material than we used to. And then we throw away a ton. And then we dig another hole of 70 tons. That's what we've been doing forever. Okay? That is not a good solution for a lot of reasons. One of them, obviously, we can run out of things. But much more important, every single time that we have to dig those holes, we're affecting the planet's biodiversity, we're affecting the things that live in it, they can be humans or they can be, tiny organisms, but we need all of those things to be alive. So the effect is actually geometric compared to what we are actually consuming. So the only way that we can get away from that is to stop the extraction. Obviously, we have to do some extraction, but the question is, how do we minimize it? And the best way to minimize it is, what if we were to reuse everything over and over again? Which is the concept of circular economy. It's also the idea behind recycling, but we have to do it in a much more massive way than has been done until now. So what did we do at UBQ? What we did at UBQ is that, which is the biggest pile of waste that there is? Landfills and incinerators. I mean, right? That's what we do. I just said we dig a hole 70 and then we throw away one. Dig a hole 70, throw away one. What if we, instead of throwing away that one, we were to reuse that one to make something else that was useful for us? And then after we finished with that one, we used it another time, and we used it another time. And that's the concept behind UBQ. But the idea is not to do it with a small percentage of what you throw away in your home. The idea is to do it with most of what you throw away in your home. Okay? And what is it that you throw away? You throw away a lot of food. You throw away a lot of organic content. People love to think that plastic is all their waste. It's not true. If you look at it worldwide, plastic is only 10 to 20% of our waste. Okay? Most of the other waste is, again, organic content, things like dirty paper, dirty carton. Okay, those are the things that really make the bulk of it. And many times we think, oh, but that's, not a very big deal. The organics are going to decompose. Who cares? Well, it turns out that they decompose into things like methane. Okay, and methane, as you know, is a very, very powerful greenhouse gas. So really, when we throw things away, not only are we forcing ourselves to have to go out and farm them again or to extract them from the planet, we're also in some way or another generating, let's say, poison for the planet. So what did we decide at UBQ? What if we went, instead of going for the little pieces, you know how in Europe you have a lot of bins, or in many countries today you have a lot of bins, you sort things out, but there's always that black bag left over.
Yeah.
That black, always. I mean, there's no way around it. Okay. So that's the one with the chicken bones. That's the one with the vegetables. It's the one with the pizza box, by the way. People think a pizza box is recyclable or compostable. It turns out people don't want to touch it. Why? Because it's full of grease. Okay, so what ends up happening to that pizza box? It ends up at the landfill, or it ends up at the incinerator. So what we did at UBQ is, you know what? Let's go for that black bag, the stuff that no one wants to touch. And that's what we actually start with at UBQ. We take everything that you throw away in that black bag. I just mentioned the vegetables, the chicken bones, but we also take all those 17-layer films that no one wants to recycle. We, sometimes those potato chip bags that no one wants to recycle because they've got aluminum on them. Or most important, the diapers. People don't think about it. Diapers are a huge proportion of our waste, and particularly in certain countries, they're an enormous part of the waste. No one has found a solution for diapers, okay? We take everything that I've just told you, 100% of it, and turn it into a brand new material that can then be used to make things. So imagine making so many things that we use every day out of your diapers, out of your chicken bones, out of all the stuff that you throw away in that black bag.
Awesome. I mean, it just sounds too good to be true. Really,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It really does. And I get how you like creating and solving a problem, and I could see how you would have come up with that. But how do you go build it or find the technology that could just kind of treat all matter the same way and then end up with the same product? There's you must tell us about the technology behind it and the story of that.
So the story of the technology is actually pretty interesting, in the sense that somebody did something really stupid, okay, and ended up with, I call it almost guck, okay, because there's no other way of labeling it, but it has certain characteristics that told you that if you were to develop that concept, maybe you could get somewhere very interesting with it, okay? And I ended up at UBQ actually as an investor. It was someone who actually, a friend of mine, or of my wife's actually, a cousin of my wife's, actually asked for my help because someone was offering him this too good to be true, as you said, investment, okay, into this technology that could supposedly take that black bag and turn it into a thermoplastic material. And the interesting thing about it, like I say, was that there was something there, there were some patents there, but as you know, there's many nice and beautiful concepts that just stay there. They stay as a concept, they stay as a piece of paper, but no one's ever able to industrialize them. And once I met the people who owned the patents, I realized, and this, here we go back, I think that you hit right on it when you said, Albert, tell me about your past. If I had not been in the plastics business, if I had not understood the difficulties of recycling, if I had not understood so many of those things, I would have never seen the possibilities that these patents could have for the world. Okay? But precisely because I did understand all of those difficulties was why I saw the enormous benefit the world would have if someone was really truly able to take all of that waste and turn it back into a material that could actually be used to make things. And so I ended up getting involved in something that was truly crazy because, as you say, if you think it's too good to be true because you're hearing about it, imagine when someone comes and tells you on top of it, I want millions of your dollars to invest in this thing that sounds completely crazy. So I was the first person probably that thought it was too good to be true. You're looking at one of them, okay, right now. But I could see the potential. I could see the potential, and it was that potential and that dream that led me into saying, you know what, this is worth doing. This is worth trying out. We're probably going to fail. I'll be very sincere with you. When we started out, I was pretty sure that it was lost money. I'll even tell you an anecdote. When I went back to my father, by the way, he's 93 years old. I've worked with him the same 40 years I told you, and I still work with him. He still works 7 days a week. When I went back to him, I told him, you know what? If we make this investment, I want to erase this from our balance sheet because I'm pretty sure we're going to lose all this money. Okay? His immediate answer was, let's do it because we really are going to solve something that no one else has been able to solve, and more importantly, that can affect absolutely everybody in the world. And so that's how we got into this. It was more, even in those days, it was very much of a dream, but we understood the pathway, and it was a pathway that took many years because in life nothing is very simple.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit, just at a high level, about how the technology kind of works then.
When we started out, all the professors, university professors and everything, with one exception, told us that the key to everything was around the plastics, that was why it worked, okay? It actually turned out to be exactly the opposite. Our technology is actually an organic-based technology, okay? That's what we ended up developing. So what we do, obviously, that black bag is very heterogeneous in the content, you know? I mean, there's all these things, you know, tomatoes and meat and vegetables, and then you have the carton and then all these plastics. So very, very heterogeneous. But what it does have in common, I already mentioned it to you, about 80% of it is actually organic. So what we do is that we take the organics and we break them down into their basic building blocks, okay? Not to the molecular level, just the building blocks. So we break them down into sugars, ligamins, and fibers. Okay? And then once they're broken down, we're able to rebuild them or to reconstitute them into what we call a matrix, the UBQ matrix. Okay? That's the label we have for it. The beauty of that matrix, think about it, Simon, as sugar candy. You know, in the fair when you go and you buy the sugar candy. Very sticky. But now you have one gentleman in the fair that decides that he wants to be a little bit fancy. So he takes M&Ms and he starts putting M&Ms into the sugar candy. Okay? So the green M&M is, and each one of the M&Ms are the things that are not organic, that are not able to be reconstituted. So there's a little bit of one type of plastic. I don't know how technical your listeners are, but a little bit of polypropylene here, a little bit of PT over there, but maybe there's a little bit of piece of metal could be left over and it's in some other place, but it all sticks to the sugar candy. And that's basically what we do with the entire waste system. The beauty of it is that because of the matrix, it all acts like one single homogeneous material. Okay, so we go from having something that was literally hundreds of different products made out of hundreds of different formulas, let's call it. We reconstitute it into something that acts as one single material. And that's where the magic of UBQ is. And
Amazing.
By the way, I'm expecting that we've learned so much that we're going to be able to develop things with time that the world is going to be amazed that we're able to do. I mean, already it's amazing what we can do with the waste, but I think that what we're going to be able to do 5 or 6 years from now, it will be much, much more amazing than what we're doing today.
What kind of stuff? What's the kind of dream with something like that?
Yeah, no, look, my dream is literally, we started out our dream was to end landfills. That was our original dream. Today, I would tell you that the technology is at a point that if everyone actually paid attention to what we're doing and started making everything that they could make with UBQ, we could probably end landfills already, okay? Because you can make things as basic as a brick with UBQ, but we can also make, and by the way, people like Mercedes are already doing it, you can also make car parts out of UBQ, okay? At least partially, if not totally. So where I'm going with this is the technology today is already there, but what I'm hoping is that we're going to be able to take the technology even further, because remember that what I want is for us to stop extracting things from the planet. You know, stop putting more pimples into the planet. Let's try to keep it, with vegetation, with animals, keep our oceans clean. All of those things are possible if we think of waste as a raw material rather than waste. Okay, and so I can see us developing things with time, where applications where today you can't use UBQ, you will be able to use UBQ. Okay, applications where you need more engineering type materials, or where you need heat resistance, or you need a bunch of other things. I don't want to get too technical here, but I can see UBQ getting there with time.
Awesome. And currently the product, so it's like a thermoplastic kind of pellet, is it, that comes out the other side of it?
Yeah, so we call it tablets. We don't want to call it pellets because it sounds like plastic. Okay. Now, again, I don't know how technical your listeners are. So there's the reason the plastics are called plastics is because they have thermoplastic characteristics. Their real name is actually polymers. That's what we use. What we call plastics technically are really polymers. Okay. Yes. So UBQ, although it is not a polymer, so does not have that in common with all these plastics we hate, okay, it does have in common the characteristic that when you heat it, it melts, and most important, when it's in molten form, it flows. And that allows us to use existing plastics equipment in order to make materials with UBQ. And this is a huge advantage from an industrial development point of view, because in the past, when we have a new material, we have to change out all of the manufacturing equipment. With UBQ, you don't need to do that. Okay, you can use what's there. It doesn't mean that in the future people won't do it, because they'll want to use UBQ in a more efficient way. But for sure, they're able to do it today with the equipment that they already have. And that is a very, very big advantage. So basically what we end up is in a world where we do need to use polymers and plastics, because like I say, they have huge benefits. We'll be able to do it, but on the other hand, we'll also be able to reuse all of those things with this new UBQ process.
So what does your product do, or what does your product not do that a normal plastic does, for instance?
It all depends what you want to make. If you're making a thicker part that is rigid, you can make it out of 100% UBQ, or very close to 100%. So a very good example is the table that you're sitting on. Okay, that tabletop can easily be almost 100 or 100% UBQ on the inside, and the laminate on the outside is the same laminate that you would have. Okay. On the other hand, if you want a more flexible part, like let's say a car dash mat or something, okay, then you're probably going to want to mix it with some kind of rubber or plastic even, okay? So the advantage of UBQ is that it can be used in a lot of different places in lesser or greater quantities. But the beauty of it is that with every gram of UBQ that you use, you're benefiting the planet tremendously. Because there's another benefit that I have not spoken about. We've concentrated very much on the waste, which was, by the way, our original objective at UBQ. Okay, we wanted to solve the waste and to generate a truly circular economy. But when we did our first life cycle assessment, we got a really big surprise. Okay, and in fact, it was a surprise even for the people who were doing the analysis, the outside entity, because what happened was that UBQ came out with a negative carbon footprint, with a negative carbon emission. Okay, so in other words, instead of generating carbon, UBQ was actually avoiding carbon. And that is an incredible thing, because there are no materials. It's very, very difficult to make a part or a material that actually removes or avoids carbon. And it turns out that UBQ does both. It removes carbon and it avoids carbon. And so by using UBQ, we actually are able to reduce all of those emissions that are coming out of landfills today. Okay, and it turns out, when we started talking about this 5 or 6 years ago, people didn't know what we were talking about. After COP28, people realized that there's a lot of emissions coming from methane. Those emissions are terrible because they have an immediate and very strong effect on the atmosphere. And on top of that, it turns out that a lot of those emissions are coming from landfills. So UBQ all of a sudden becomes what I call a multifaceted solution. Instead of just solving one environmental problem, we're actually solving a menu of environmental problems. So I talked about waste. Now I'm talking to you about carbon. Clearly, we're able to replace plastic partially or totally. Okay, so look at how one single material can have an enormous impact on some of the biggest problems that we're facing in the planet today. So in many ways, for me, UBQ has turned out into I don't like to use the word miracle in the sense that, again, it becomes too good to be true. But the fact is that all of these things I'm telling you are validated. They've been certified by people other than ourselves. In some cases, the certification came as a surprise to us. I just told you that. We weren't expecting any of these things. But UBQ can really change the way that consumption affects the planet and how humans affect the planet.
And tell us a little bit about the scale-up journey, because that's always key. When I look back at the history of bioplastics, for instance, and the challenges of bringing to scale and the cost competitive nature of it, right? And lots of failures out there. Tell me a little bit about your journey towards commercialization.
Well, look, first of all, it's interesting that you bring up bioplastics, because bioplastics actually are an example of why things have been difficult and sometimes also the incorrect road that we take. Bioplastics actually are not that good for the environment, okay? Many of them actually, I would tell you, are even worse than petroleum-based, because a lot of times people don't do the numbers before they start. But the path is a very long path, okay? When you want to solve complex problems, they don't get solved in a day. I told you that I invested about 13 years ago. We thought we would get certain things done in a 3-year period. It took 10 years, Simon. 10. Okay? Not 4, not 5. It took 10 instead of 3. We did things a little bit differently than most people because we were lucky enough that we were backed with an industrial our backing was industrial. I told you I'm an industrialist. And fortunately, I had the wherewithal to be able to, carry the company through the 10 years. Okay? Which is very difficult for funds, for example. Okay? VCs do a great job in technology. Without them, we probably wouldn't have a lot of the great things that we have in the world today. Private equities and investment funds help grow companies, but on the other hand, their vision is not as long term as an industrialist is. Okay, I always joke around that I can't look at anything except how will my grandchildren be doing with it. I look at things 100 years out. I don't like looking at things 5 years out or 3 years out. So when you want to develop things like this, you really have to be very long-term oriented. The number of problems that you think you're going to face are probably going to be multiplied by a factor of, if you're lucky, 3, if you're unlucky, a factor of 10, okay? Because there are many things that you can't predict until you're in front of them. And this is a path. So many times you can't see all the way through to the other side. I like to describe it like, you're standing in the mountains, and the ocean is in one direction, but you don't know how many rivers you're going to have to cross or how many mountains you're going to have to climb. And that's what developing new materials and new technologies is about. It's a difficult pathway, and you have to be very realistic about what you're doing, and you have to be very self-critical of what you're doing, because otherwise you're going to fool yourself along the way. And I think that at UBQ we did that. And the other thing that we were very good at, I think, is that we didn't go out too early. We didn't have a website, I believe, like for our first 8 years. You should have seen the young people in our company. They couldn't understand how they could work in a company that didn't have a website. It's almost like if you don't have a website, you don't exist. But on the other hand, you have to be very careful. In today's world, things get hyped up very quickly. So we were talking about bioplastics. There are bioplastics that are coming up the line that are going to be very, very good for the environment, very, very good for the world. But these come with an entirely different methodology, an entirely different way of thinking than the original ones that we saw in the past and that some, as you were saying, failed, okay? But you have to have that vision of not taking the problem to your customer, of you resolving many of the issues before you get out there, before you start talking, and again, of being very self-critical. Don't convince yourself that you've got the greatest thing in the world until that you actually have it, okay? We tend to be very over-optimistic sometimes, and that generates a lot of noise in the world. And also, in many ways, for people who are less technical, it also creates a lot of unhappiness in the sense that they thought the solution was there, and then it turns out that it never becomes a reality. So it is a very difficult pathway.
So it just sounds like avoiding the hype until you've actually got something to talk about, really.
I really believe in that very much. Yeah, maybe it's all this white hair, like I told you that I have. We didn't have beta in my generation. Either you came out with a good product or you just didn't come out with a product. And I believe in that. Tech is different. But when you're dealing with real life things, you have to think a little bit differently.
So when did you start making a little bit more of a noise? Like, are you coming on the podcast and you've got a website now? And
I tell you, it's probably in the last 4 years. If you look back at me, there's very few pictures of me. I had never done interviews of any sort, not for print media, not for anything, even though in Latin America, and I still have a large presence and everything. It's never been my way. UBQ is something that the whole world needs to know about. And if I have to be the person that goes out and speaks, then that's what happens. And as a company, we're doing more and more of that. But that is one thing, Simon, and obviously that's why part of the reason that I'm here, we need help. Because people do need to understand that this is a real solution. It's here already, and it's not something that we need to wait for anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're in Holland today and this week, right? Because you've got a facility you're building or have built in Holland. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So this is really a world-class, world-size plant. It's an 80,000 ton plant that can process, Dutch waste is a little bit different than what we have in the Americas. So we can process about 110,000 tons of waste, okay? Most of what we lose, by the way, is humidity. Don't think that we throw things out. Actually, the only things that we sort out of the waste are metals and minerals. Everything else stays inside. But we do get rid of the humidity. And so this plant actually can have an enormous effect already on the region, can create a lot of benefit, replacing plastics, 80,000 tons of plastics here in the Netherlands and worldwide.
Amazing, yeah. So you get from the 100,000, is the conversion from the 100,000 tons of waste to 80,000 tons of plastic, does it work like that?
Yeah, it's about, depending on how humid the material is, usually the humidity can be anywhere from 25 to 50%. So depending on where the humidity is, we lose that humidity. And that's why in order to make 80,000 tons of UBQ, we need to use about 100 and something tons of waste.
Got it. And did you build this yourself or did you build this with partners?
Yeah, so I told you that pretty much we self-funded for the first 10 years. And then I'm very bad with dates, Simon, so please, if I make any mistake.
It all merges in, doesn't it?
Yeah. I don't. So I apologize if I make mistakes on years. But about 3 years ago, we did go out for what in today's finance world they call a round, an investment round. And we actually got some extremely good partners now. Okay, so that round was led by the TPG Rise and the TPG Rise Climate Funds, which I believe are still the largest impact funds in the world. What we liked about them was that they're not simply money. They actually understand the sustainability world. They very much like us are very conscious that we have to be able to certify our numbers to be sure about what we talk about. Today there's a lot of greenwashing going on. So it was very important for us to bring in a partner that understood that world and that would actually be able to support us in that. And I think that we found that with the Rise and the Rise Climate Funds. And then we had some other investors that have been very important for us. Battery Ventures, which is a venture capital fund who's been involved almost from the very beginning. They were the only fund that was with us, and they have been, I have to tell you, not a fund. To me, they're more than a partner. I mean, they've been with us through the good, through the bad. Imagine a fund sticking around for 10 years, like I told you, okay? That's not very normal. And not only sticking around, but with a big smile on their face, believing in us. It's wonderful, and I have to be very thankful of having partners like that. And then we have some big people also, people like M&G from the UK. We have Rubin Brothers. We have a small group of what I would call a strong investors that are not only helping today, but that will allow us to grow because we have a lot of growth plans as well.
Awesome. Tell me, do you have to sell bankable kind of offtake agreements in order to go and facilitate the building of the plant?
I wish we could have, but it's a new material. This is not, when we talk about green steel, for example, we're really talking about an energy solution where you still make steel. You still make the same steel that you made before, okay? So it's very easy for you to get an offtake agreement because you're meeting the same specs of what people are used to doing. We're doing something entirely different. We're actually telling people, stop using what you were using and use something new. And that isn't quite as easy. Okay, that requires a lot of development work in the sense of, you have to hold your new customer's hand. You have to teach them how to use it. It's actually a pretty easy process when people follow directions, which people don't like doing, by the way. People don't follow directions a lot. But in general, we have a very good process so that people can do that. But they have to see it. They have to feel it. And most important also, they have to know that that capacity is there. If you're going to commit to something, you need to know the capacity is there. Imagine an automaker that makes a part for a platform that they're going to come out with 2 years from now, and that company doesn't have that material back then. And this is a lot where all that hype that I was talking to you about does a lot of damage, because people have hyped up a lot of things that have turned out to not become true. So the good fortune that we had is that we actually built this plant with no contracts. Okay, so now you can see the trust of these investors. And obviously the belief that I had as an investor as well that we could make this a reality. And so this company has been a little bit strange in the way we've done things.
And tell me about the product market fit then with customers now and how that's kind of working. I'm sure from a sustainability viewpoint that customers must be desperate to get their hands on some of this material to use it within their supply chain, right? But how is that development going?
So look, first of all, using UBQ only makes sense if you care about sustainability, okay? People talk that they care, but they don't always care, it's a fact of life. It's not a surprise, by the way. It's not a surprise. It's not like something that I would tell you, oh boy, I thought it was going to be different. It is not. If people want to use UBQ, if they believe in the sustainability, like I tell you, we have a clear process where we actually go in, we explain to people how it works, we look at their product portfolios, we can tell them which products are the easy wins, which are harder wins, we can tell them what sustainability benefits they will have with one product versus the other product, how much UBQ they can use inside. We can go through the whole process, but they need to want the sustainability and they need to want or be willing to change, okay? There is no way that you can change the world without change. Unfortunately, that word is always there. And so that pathway is more a question of, it's more a question of willingness than of ability, okay? If people are willing to change today, we have a material with which they can change, but not everybody wants to change in the end. Okay, they're not willing to go through the pathway.
Have you seen much involvement on the willingness for corporates and companies to change?
You know, the interesting thing is what we have found is that the closer the company is to the consumer, the more interested they are in change. Okay, there's no question. So if they're close to the consumer, for example, a retailer, they get on board very quickly. Okay, they get on board very quickly. So, you know, we have some big retail chains in Europe that, you know, immediately once they understood what UBQ was, they went back to their vendors and said, I want UBQ in my products. And those have been the people that are really, let's say, pulling UBQ into the market in many ways. Okay, the OEMs in the auto industry. Okay, they're close to the consumer and they have regulation, both things. And so, very surprising to me. I'll tell you the truth. When we started, I thought the auto industry was the last one I was looking at. Okay, why? Because they take forever to make a decision. Everybody, they're famous for it. You know, they're very, very careful. Where the amount of due diligence that they did on us, but the speed with which they did the due diligence, really surprised me. Okay, really, really surprised me. The auto industry is looking, at least the people that we're working with, is looking for ways to use UBQ in anything that they can find. Okay, they really believe in the sustainability solution, and they don't have other materials that can meet it. So it all depends on your interest. If you're simply a manufacturer that is worried about cost, then probably you don't want to change, even if UBQ will bring you some cost savings. It's very funny how people don't want change. It's not a question of money, it's a question of willingness. And one thing you haven't asked me, which I'll mention right now, is different from any other environmental material that I know of, UBQ can compete with all the petroleum-based plastics. Okay?
On the price-wise?
On the price.
Yeah.
On the price, okay? We can compete with $30 oil plastics, and we can obviously compete with $100 oil plastics. We don't live in that world of that recycling world that, as you know, many recycling companies go bust as soon as the price of recycle or the price of oil goes down. We don't live through that. Okay, we developed a technology from day one that was meant to be economically competitive. That was always very, very important. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thanks for mentioning. Yes, so much of the story, if you look at the bioeconomy and you look at the challenges of the fluctuation of the price of oil and what that did to the sector. So listen, that's very useful. And just tell me, like, moving forward, when you picture getting this plant up and running, finding customers with a good product fit, is the future growth of the company going to be financed by partners that see you, that love the material, that want more scale, ultimately?
To tell you the truth, it's not going to be very difficult to grow from a financing point of view. Okay, why? Because this is a real industry. This is bricks and mortars. This is the kind of thing that banks, institutions are used to financing. Okay, we're not that. Even though we have a great technology, we're changing the way that things are done, and it's a jump in technology. You still need factories, you need equipment, you need bricks and mortars. This is the kind of stuff that people love to finance. And what we're seeing is that we also have the advantage now of all kinds of green funds all over the world. Okay. It's not just in the US and in Europe. We see them all over the place. We also have the multilateral banks, you know, the IFC, the World Bank, that are also very interested in these things, for places like where, like my Colombia and things. And so very much we don't foresee a lot of problems on that end. It should be fairly easy to finance our growth.
Great stuff. Well, look, Albert, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you for a lot longer, but I know you're a busy man and you're only over in Holland for a short period of time. But listen, your story and the innovations at UBQ Materials are really remarkable. So thanks a lot for taking us through the journey and really sharing how you're driving this change and innovation in the world of the circular economy, sustainability, and a new class of materials, really. So, it's awesome. It really is. And to all the listeners, thanks for being with us, right? And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your community and subscribe, for more episodes. And let's continue to explore, wonderful, incredible stories, of leaders on a mission. So until next time, stay inspired and make a positive impact.